In this lecture, I'm going to show you how to configure loopback interfaces. And loopback interfaces are actually logical interfaces. They're not assigned to physical devices. And they're used a lot for management purposes because as a logical interface, you can connect to them and run pings, and they're used a lot for SNMP and NTP as a source interface because they never go down like a physical interface does. So they're used as a management interface. So in this example, I'm going to assign each of these routers to a loopback interface, and I'm going to set up Telnet and run a Telnet session from the host based on the loopback interfaces for management purposes. So we'll start with router 1, and the first thing I want to do is configure the loopback interface. So interface loopback and then 0. And then I'm going to give it an IP address. In this case, I'm going to use 255.1 as a standard. So I want it to use just that 1 because it's router 1. And I'm going to assign a host mask to it. Because it's not assigned to a physical address, it's actually a host address. So it's not it's actually, like I said, a host address. So it will use a host mask because it's an individual address. And at this point then I'll just give it a description, call it management interface, for example. And then just do a no shut because it is a layer 3 interface. I'll go and now I want to do an enable password. I want to configure that. Just call it CCNA. And the reason I'm doing this is for telnet purposes. Then I'll go to the VTY lines and I want to set those up so I can telnet. So I'll just do a password, CCNA labs, something like that, and then just the login command just to enable login to it. And that's all there is to it as far as setting that up goes. So what I'll do is on router 2 I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to set up a username and password. So I'm going to use local authentication for the telnet session instead of just from the VTY line. So it's a little better security, and so that's what I'll do. So I'll set up an enable password for telnet, and I'll configure a loopback interface for management, and I'll configure the a username and password local account, and then the VTY lines. So we'll go to router 2. And then just enable. And just go loopback 0. Oh, interface loopback 0. Then give it an IP address. 192.168.255.2 because it's router 2. And then put a host address mask on it. That's 4255s. And give it a description. Call it management interface. And then just do a no shut. At this point, let's go up one level, and I want to do an enable password here as well. Let's call it CCNA. And I want to set up a user account for this as well, so I'm going to do a little different local authentication this time. So I'll paste that in there. And that's just the username is Cisco and password is CCNA labs, and it's got all privileges to privilege level 15. Then I'll set up the VTY line 0 through 4. I'll just use login local this time. I'm not going to put password on because I've already configured the user account already. So I'm just going to point the VTY lines to the local account with login local command. It'll use that local account for authentication. And that should do it for router 2. So router 3, I'll do the same thing. I'll configure a loopback interface. And what I'll do is I'll just use basic authentication here. Same as for router 1. So interface loopback 0 and an IP address, and this time I'm going to use 192.168.255.3 and the host mask. And notice these loopbacks are in the same subnet, the 255. So that's something you want, a network management traffic in its own subnet. And give it a description called management interface, and then just no shut to activate it. What I'll do at this time then, I'll just configure a enable password for Telnet, and I'll just do the VTY lines and just put a password of CCNA Labs like the other one, keep it standard, and then just a standard login statement. And that's how easy it is to do the loopbacks. And that's 3 loopback, 3, and at this point I'm going to telnet now because I've done all the interfaces, and I'm just going to telnet from the host to all the loopback interfaces. Just verify it works okay. So from the host I want to telnet over to router 1. So I'll open a command prompt, and I'll just go at telnet and use the loopback address, and that's router 1, and password CCNA Labs. Now so I'm on router 1 now. I'm just gonna get on the enable command. So I've just got on, that's the enable password. I've used CCNA. So now I'm on router 1 based off that loopback interface. If I go through this here, there's the loopback interface 255.1. The other ones are configured as well. And there's the VTY password. So I can do the same thing, make sure I've got connectivity. I'll just exit out of this session to router 1 from host 1. So now I'm going to telnet over to router 2. So that's 192.168.255.2. And this time on this router I set up a user account of Cisco is what I used, and then just CCNA Labs. So now I'm on router 2. That was based on a local authentication account I set up, and in this case because it's a user account with privilege 15, it goes right to enable mode. So I went right past the enable prompt. So I have and go show run at this point, and just go through, and there's the account. And there's no password encryption, that's why you can see it. There's no service password encryption, so passwords are not encrypted. You can notice that there. So there's the loopback 2552 and a login local. So what I'll do is I'll exit from router 2. Now I'm going to telnet over to router 3, make sure that works. So I'm on host 1. Now I'm going to go to router 3, and password is just CCNA Labs on the VTY line. Now I'm going to enable, and I'm on router 3. And I can go on there, show run, do configuration, and all that. Everything works fine there. There's the loopback interface, 255.3. And management is working correctly between on all the router interfaces for the loopback interfaces from the host. And that concludes loopback interface.